Back when I was 12, I went to private school, so I needed to take a long walk to my apartment since my school was a bit far from the city center. This was in Zagreb, Croatia, so I had a lot of public transportation options to get home. My usual routine was to get on the bus at the station in front of my school, all the way down from the main street, then take a tram to the public park and walk home the rest of the way. Our school had a double timeline where one week we went to school in the morning and the other week we had classes in the afternoon. This happened during one of my afternoon weeks. I was walking out with a few classmates since we all got on the same bus. The rest of my classmates were picked up by their parents. When we got on the bus, there were a few empty seats, so I took a seat in front of a balding middle-aged man who was wearing slightly dirty shoes. That was my mistake. As soon as I sat down, he started staring at me, like staring with a cold look in his eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, I took the book out of my bag and started reading. I would have used my phone if I could, but it was dead because I forgot to charge it before I left the house that day. The guy didn't stop staring at me for what felt like the whole bus ride, to the point where I couldn't even concentrate on my book, but I refused to put it down because I was scared. I would have mentioned something to my classmates, but they were all spread out on the bus, and I was too scared to move. I don't know why, but I didn't want him to see that I was scared, thinking that maybe that would deter him. Or maybe I thought he was just staring at me for some stupid reason. When it finally got to our stop, my classmates and I got off, and some of us headed to the tram station while the others walked to their houses. The guy who was staring at me also got off with us, and he started tailing us while keeping a fair distance. I told one of my friends about this, but urged him not to look back, thinking ignoring him would be our best option. When we got to the station, different people got on different trams, since each of them had different routes. I needed to take tram 2, and so did my friend. We waited for it to arrive, and the guy was somewhere to our right, but we refused to look at him. When our tram arrived, my friend and I got on, but so did the creepy guy. When I arrived at my stop, I tried to quietly discuss with my friend if getting off with me just in case was a good idea. But then we saw the guy get off himself and start heading back into the park, opposite where I needed to go. He probably overheard us talking, since there was barely any people in the tram at the time. It was around 9 p.m., but I didn't think of that, so I thought that it had all been a misunderstanding. When I got off and the tram sped away to the next station, I started walking home. It was a short distance, so it would have only taken me 5 minutes, but then I noticed someone following me. I immediately knew it was the same guy, so I picked up my pace and walked to my apartment. As I turned the corner into the alley that housed my apartment, the guy was getting closer. I got to the building and buzzed my mom on the intercom. I wish he would have hurried up, but in the end, the guy managed to catch up with me. I could smell the stench coming off of him as he started talking. "Hey, how have you been, buddy? I saw your dad yesterday and he told me all about how you were getting on in that new school of yours. And I immediately knew he was lying, since my dad had been away on work-related business for months and hadn't returned home in that time once. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there quietly, staring at him. Just then the door buzzed and unlocked, so I bolted for it. I managed to rush in and start running up the stairs, but he was following behind me, running himself. Never in my life have I felt such an adrenaline rush as I ran up those stairs to the 3rd floor. I had my backpack on with books weighing me down, so I had a disadvantage. But in the end, I managed to arrive at the door where my mom was happily waiting for me. With no warning, I shoved her away from the door as I entered before slamming it shut. Fortunately, the guy had enough common sense not to continue chasing me after that. I told my mom what happened, and she called the police and they arrived sometime later, questioning me on how the guy looked and what exactly happened. In the end, they looked at camera footage, but since it was so dark, and I didn't turn on the indoor building lights as I entered. They weren't able to get a clear view of his face. For weeks, I was too scared to go home, so my mom picked me up every time until 2 weeks later, when on the news, the man was arrested for kidnapping and raping of children. They showed his face, and it was the same exact guy I saw that night. So I finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I was safe for now. But that didn't excuse the fact that I was so careless by not charging my phone, and there's still so many bad people out there. To the person I met, if you're ever gonna get released for some ungodly reason, I hope I never see your face again. This truly felt like something from a horror movie. I'm posting this to look for any possible answers or closure. I've since told the police about this, and the police asked me why I didn't call them when it was happening. My friend and I were in a dark car park by the lake in my city. The lake is surrounded by various car parks and trees. The closer you get to the lake, the further you are from the main road, which takes you out of the wooded area. My friend and I were parked 5 meters from the lake, with the car facing the lake. We were sitting in there listening to music and chatting for about 10 minutes, with me in the driver's seat, but the ignition off. When all of a sudden my friend, who was looking out my driver's side window, says to me, "Is that a man standing there?" I laughed and looked ahead, and all I see is the dark lake in front of me. I say, "No," but he points his finger at the driver's side window, and I turn my head to see a man with what seemed to be a cat mask covering the top half of his face, standing about 10 meters away, staring and not moving. I'm immediately extremely freaked out. The way he was standing there and just staring at us through the mask was so unnerving. I immediately start the car as quickly as I could, which leads this man running straight to my driver's side door at full speed. Thankfully, my doors were locked and he stood no chance against my car. Just as we breathed a small sigh of relief that the car was now moving, we see a white car following closely behind our car. Now, as I mentioned, we are in the wooded area with dirt roads and several turns which I'm not familiar with. Each turn we made, which were all wrong turns unfortunately, the car would follow us. We were screaming the whole way, not sure what they wanted from us. Eventually, the worst thing that could possibly happen happened, and I was making the wrong turn into a dead-end car park. The white car parks at an angle, blocking me in. At this point, I'm genuinely fearing for my life, and the masked man appears from the forest, coming at my car quick. I drove around, nearly hitting them, but I managed to ease past the white car at an angle. I finally drove out of there the right way and got onto the main road. To me, the scariest part is wondering what they wanted from us. It felt more like a prank considering the whole car pursuit. There's no attempt to block us in. I don't know what kind of weapons they had in the car. I thought it was possibly an attempted carjacking, but if that was the case, I feel like there would have been more efficient means of doing this. I'm not sure if this is going to be that interesting of a story, since it happened at such a young age that the story had to be relayed to me through family. When I was around 1 or 2 years old, me and my sister were at our aunt's house. My mom, sister, and I were outside in the front yard, and she said she needed to get something from inside. My sister was around 5 or 6 at the time, and should have never been put in charge of a baby. Anyway, during the time that she left, and it was just the two of us outside, apparently someone had grabbed me and no one noticed until my mom came back outside, and I was nowhere to be seen. They immediately freaked out, and my uncle at the time drove all around the area searching for me. He had a feeling that he knew who it was. He was on the verge of breaking into the guy's house because he banged on the door multiple times and was ignored. My aunt must have talked him out of it because they ended up going back home and called the police. When the cops got there, they were driving all around and ended up finding me a couple blocks away, just standing outside of the very house my uncle said the guy was in. They never made any arrest on the guy. and I don't think they questioned him. My family says that they think once he heard the sirens, he panicked and just let me outside, and that's why they found me there. There's no way a baby that just recently started walking could have wandered off that far. So, guy who kidnapped me and left me on the side of the road, let's not ever meet again. When I was 14 or 15, I used to have absolutely no stranger danger awareness at all. I didn't mind being out at night on my own. Not that I was much at that age. I'd go down the back streets on my own. Any basic safety techniques just didn't bother me because I thought I would always be fine. One day, I was walking back from town and thought I would take my usual shortcut down the alleyways behind the high street. I'm quite happily walking when I round the corner into a guy who's loitering, and we lock eyes straight away. I thought the polite thing to do was smile, and thankfully, he smiled back. I decided he's no threat and walked right by him. Then I hear him say something about my smile. I shout thanks over my shoulder and carry on. I turn down another corner. So does he, now saying that he likes my trainers. So I yell another thanks. He asks me where I got them from. I say I don't know. Now I'm speeding up because this dude is definitely following me. I turn down onto a main road where I know there will be people, hoping this would deter him. Nope, there he is, following behind, still trying to get me to engage. I come to a busy crossing, and I know he's about to catch up to me. As safely as I could, which was probably not that safely, I bowled across the road, leaving him to watch me on the other side, still shouting something to me. I ran across another road and dived into a convenience store and called the person who was looking after me at the time, who told me to stay there, that she was coming to get me. Whilst I was on the phone with her, I see the man round the corner, look around. He was even checking behind cars and everything. Thankfully, he gave up pretty quickly and seemed to leave. My care worker called the police and 2 officers came by, but they weren't overly concerned. I guess he hadn't technically done anything. Interestingly, they did seem to know from the description who it was likely to be, and said that they were in touch with the people who work with him and will let them know. Anyway, about 4 days later, I'd go to a coffee place I used to read that's not too far from there. It didn't even cross my mind that I might see him again. In my head, it was all sorted, done, dusted. I take my seat near the toilets and start reading when the toilet door opens, and the big blue coat I described to the police a few days earlier emerges. I stare at him in fear. He briefly regards me, then carries on past. I have no idea if he recognized me or not. It didn't seem like it. Safe to say, I'm a lot more careful now. I'm a male, 16. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. and I was skateboarding at a skate park around 5 minutes away from my house. I didn't have a car yet, so I usually skate there. Sometimes I do have to deal with some creepy or strange people because I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, in not a great part of town, so that's usually a common thing here. This night I went there alone and there was only one other person at the park who I met there for the first time. We had a good time and skated around for an hour, just me and him. Eventually, a guy and a child came walking into the skate park and came up to us. The first weird thing I noticed is the child had no shoes on and was wearing pants and a t-shirt, even though it's pretty cold outside even for me, and I was wearing a hoodie. Another thing that's strange was he had what seemed to be a gun with him. I noticed the guy had some tattoos and he was maybe around 6 foot. This guy starts first by talking to the guy I was skating with and tells him that he cuts hair and if he ever needs a barber, to hit him up. My friend says thanks, and then he walks over to me saying the same thing. I just say alright, thank you, and thought he would leave us alone. He asked if his son could try my board. I was a little hesitant at first, but I said alright. The child didn't even seem to want to try it. The man picked him up by his arms and put him on it. Eventually, the child stands on it and is trying it. While he's doing that, the guy turns to me and repeats himself, saying, "I'm a barber, and he's just here with his nephew." I thought it was really weird that he said it was his son first, and now he's saying his nephew. About 10 minutes later, my friend leaves me there, and the guy is still there. He asks me to do a trick for his nephew, and while I'm doing it, forces him to watch me by holding his head in a place towards me. After I do it, he repeats himself again, that he's a barber if I ever need my hair cut, and then he says he's here with his son. I then ask, "Didn't you say that was your nephew?" To which he says, "Oh yeah, sorry, I get confused sometimes. My bad." I just shrug it off and tell him I needed to go. He then says, "Yeah, his dad's coming to pick him up now." So I'm leaving and I look back and he's getting into a car. I'm not actually going home yet. I was just getting to McDonald's to have something to eat. I see the car drive off, but instead of going in the opposite direction, he's going the same way I'm going, to the same McDonald's. He comes up to me again and says, "Hey, what a coincidence. I was hungry too," or something like that. At this point, I just leave, and not before he repeats himself again and asks for my number. I say no thanks. Really weird guy. Just wondering if anyone has any theories or anything as to what was going on with him and the kid. I'm a 27-year-old female. When I was about 15, my cousin, who was 14 at the time, and I were walking past a really dark alley in the late afternoon. I noticed an old, suspicious car with a creepy guy driving slowly past us. He turned around and pulled up right next to us with the creepiest look on his face. He was probably in his late 20s. He asked us in the creepiest voice if we had a lighter he could borrow. For a moment, I thought about saying yes, but my instincts kicked in, and I said, "No, sorry." Then he seemed frustrated and asked if we needed a lift somewhere. We freaked out and ran away. It was such a creepy moment. To this day, I wonder what he was planning to do with us. I'm now a 41-year-old female, but when I was 20 years old, I attended college in Northeast Pennsylvania. I lived off campus and had a part-time job at the local mall. The mall was just over a mile away, and I would walk to and from work regularly. The mall generally closed at 9 p.m., and I would finish up my closing tasks and start walking home around 9:30 p.m. or 10 at the latest. Occasionally, I would get a ride home from a coworker, but most of them were high schoolers getting picked up by their parents. One night, I was walking my familiar route home. There are never many people out and about downtown until I got back onto campus, which I would cut across to get home. This night, I was only a few blocks from the mall, and I noticed a van parked next to the corner, but didn't think anything of it initially. There were always a smattering of cars parked around. The van appeared to be running, and the headlights were on. As I got a bit closer, I noticed the sliding door on the side was open. I definitely noticed, but assumed that someone must be loading something in and out of one of the local businesses along the street. As I walk past the van, there's a sudden flurry of movement to my left. There had apparently been a man crouched by the dumpster there, and he was running straight at the open van door. The scary part was that I was directly between him and the open van door. He was trying to shove me inside the van. I screamed, and I can only credit my complete awkward lack of coordination for what happened next. I tripped and stumbled when he surprised me, so when he hit me, I was already falling down to the ground. The force he hit me with only got my head and shoulders into the open door, while the majority of my body was outside on the ground. I remember he grabbed me around the waist and was trying to hoist me up through the door, but I was just discombobulated dead weight. He jumped over me into the van, grabbed a handful of my hair and started pulling me off the ground into his van. This is when headlights of a car turning down the street washed over me, and I could briefly see that this was a white guy in a black hoodie. When I saw the car, I screamed louder and started wildly flailing my arms. I heard their brakes screech, and then the guy let go of my hair. I jumped back and the hooded bastard slammed the door shut, and seconds later accelerated away. A cute, little white-haired Polish woman had been in the car that turned down the road at the exact right moment to save me. She hugged me and told me I was safe, and it was then that I realized I was still screaming. She sat on the sidewalk with me, and then walked me to her car. Cell phones were relatively new. Neither of us had one. She drove me to the police station and stayed with me while I answered questions and made a report. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. My housemate with a car let me borrow it anytime I was going to work after that, and I never walked downtown after that. I had nightmares for a while. I can't help but think what could have happened to me. I grew up in a small town, primarily Hispanic. Everyone knew everything. We had some things here and there, of course, but other than that, not too much stuff happens here. I'm overweight, to put it simply, and not to the standards of beauty, really. I remember reading a meme online once where they joked about, "Can't catch me or kidnap me since you can't carry me. Keep eating cake," and laughed at that, and was like, so true. God, I didn't realize how that would come back and bite me. I believe I was 19, and it was nighttime. My weed plug was doing a stash and dash, and being broke and desperate, I went for it. I figured, I grew up here, I know all the areas. What made this more tempting is it's actually not far from my area at all. So I said, fuck it. I was on a video call with my boyfriend and told him I was going for it. He stays on the phone with me as I head out. Mind you, it's late. The areas I have to cross are not well lit, and I left with nothing on me. Not even my taser, alarm, and pepper spray that my dad made me have. Oh, and what makes things worse, I snuck out because I didn't want my dad to know I was hunting for weed. So this was already starting out great. I set off. I have to cross the railroad tracks to get to the area, which was pitch black. Only the main road in the distance lighting it up, and some lights from warehouses nearby. But other than that, it was hard to see. I make my way towards the main road and notice a semi parked on the side of the road. Not unusual, semis park there all the time, so nothing weird. Then I hear a, "Hola, hey." I look over and see a man in a semi-truck. He looked generic. A Mexican man with a red long sleeve. He looked like any other man I'd see around town. But his smile, I don't know, he was just off. I waved, being polite. He gestures for me to come over and start speaking in Spanish, but I don't know Spanish. I know what you're thinking. 1. Why don't you know Spanish if you grew up in a Hispanic town? And 2. Why aren't you running? My parents never taught me. Sue me. And 2. He was far away, so I kept walking. I just sheepishly respond that I don't speak Spanish. I said this in Spanish. I learned the phrase just to say it to people. I wave him off, quickly walking away. My boyfriend asks me, "Who's that?" I just tell him some random semi-truck driver. I go on with the night. I think I've been out for 40 minutes at this point, and I realize I'm not gonna find it. Big sad. So I start heading home, still on the phone with my boyfriend. I keep talking to him, and my phone is dying, which is actually what made my boyfriend tell me to just go home. So I start to walk back. I go down the road and look down the pitch black area where the railroad is, and I stop. I just had a bad feeling. Something told me not to go home just yet. I tell my boyfriend I'm gonna look at the other end of the street that was towards where the warehouse was, giving off light. Past the empty trailers partially hidden by the shadows, I start walking into the light and I hear movement behind me and, "Hey." I turned around hella quick and saw the same semi-truck driver with the same smile he had. He came out from behind the trailer he was hiding behind. He had his right hand tucked in his pocket and was posturing his body in a way where he was hiding whatever he had. He told me to come here and started getting closer to me. I immediately told my boyfriend to wake up his dad and come get me. I backed up quickly and was trying so hard to think. He saw that I was on the phone and immediately had a mad and annoyed look on his face. He stopped and actually began hiding behind the trailers, so I booked it down the road, telling my boyfriend to come get me or have his dad come get me. I didn't want to call my dad because even at that moment, for some reason, I was still terrified of getting caught sneaking out. I ran across the main road to this little mini mart across the street and hid behind the ice machine. I told my boyfriend I needed to call someone and hung up on him. I called my friend, who thank God was out with his girlfriend. I tell him I'm in danger and need him to come get me. Then I tell him where I'm at. While I was waiting for them, I stayed behind the ice machine and saw his semi. I saw him look around for me and shake his head in disappointment before driving off. Even in that moment, I didn't feel safe, not until my friend pulled up. Everything hit me once he got out of the car and I hugged him crying. He and his girlfriend calmed me down and took me home. I got a lecture from my boyfriend, but I'd rather take that lecture than anything else. I was lucky, way too lucky. The false sense of security my weight and looks give me really shattered after that, and I'm glad for it. It terrifies me to think of how things could have turned out if I didn't have my boyfriend on the phone with me. So semi-truck driver, let's not meet. I never want to see that smile ever again. This happened to me about 2 or 3 years ago. When I was 16, I used to work at a fast food restaurant and lived in the place where we have all seasons. At this point, it was winter, so it got dark pretty early, around 5 or 6 p.m. I was called to come into work this particular day, but the weather was kind of bad, causing us not to have any customers. As a result, we had to close the store early. It was about 5:30 p.m. when my manager left, locking the store and making me wait outside for my ride. About 20 minutes had passed since she left, and I was really cold, so I decided, regrettably, that I would walk to my friend's house just a few blocks away, about a 10-minute walk, and wait for my ride there. The store I worked at was on a busy street that was near a residential neighborhood. As I walk away from the store, I start walking down the residential street behind the store. I was walking on the sidewalk to the left of the street, as there was only one sidewalk on the right side of the street. If I walked on the right sidewalk, I'd only walk on it for a block, and then I would have to walk the rest of the way on the road. There were also woods on that side of the road. It was convenient as well because the left side of the street was my store and there were no streetlights. I walked about 3/4 of the block when I got this feeling that I was being watched. The neighborhood was really dark at this point, and I had pretty much reached the end of the block and was getting ready to cross the street when I noticed a silhouette of someone walking on the right side of the street near the woods. They were about 5'9" to 5'10" and looked to be maybe 180, 200 pounds. I couldn't make out any features though. I'm the type of person who's very aware of my surroundings and slightly paranoid, as I've been followed, almost kidnapped, stalked. You get the gist. So when I notice him, I stop walking and immediately get a sick feeling in my stomach. The man then noticed me and proceeded to walk slowly and yelled out to me. He says, "Yo, come here, I want to talk to you." I say back, "No, I'm good. I'm only 16. Then I turn around and start walking back to the store. He continues to yell things at me, trying to convince me to come to him. At this point, something in me told me to run, and I did just that. As I'm running, I know I shouldn't have, but I turned my head to see if he was actually chasing me or not, and to my horror, he was. So I turned up the speed and ran as fast as I can. Thankfully, as I reached the store, my ride pulled up, so I ran to the car. As I tried to get in, the door was locked. It took about 20 seconds for them to unlock the car, which felt like hours. Eventually, I got in and just broke down crying. Not gonna lie, I was kind of out of shape, so my back was hurting from breathing so hard, and I was all frazzled. This was the first time I was chased on foot, and let me tell you, it's way more scarier, surreal, and intense being chased on foot than someone chasing you in a car. Still to this day, I've added trauma from this incident, and it makes me hard to go anywhere by myself, especially in the dark. So to the man that chased me in the dark, let's not meet again.